On this program, we continue our roundtable discussion on global poverty with representatives from World Vision, the Brookings Institution, Oxfam America, and the Republic of Niger.
When you look at investment in big infrastructure, like building roads from Niamey to Cotonou, why do we have it? Yes, we want commodities, we want agriculture produce, we want minerals to be transported to the port at a cost-effective rate. But also, we want to create this infrastructure project which are going to be a platform for creating jobs. If people do not have jobs, what we see, they live in their communities. They live in Niger, they live in Senegal, they live in Mali, to go through the desert and to try to reach the shores with consequences.
So you're referring to the project of the rail line from Niger through Benin out to the sea.
Yes.
To transfer, and the benefits that would come from new hires, more workers, and moving of the exports.
If you were to look down on a society with its problems from 30,000 feet, what you would notice, I suspect, is that all the parts have got to work together. Sure, government's important. Sure, a corrupt government can cause a problem. But if there's not a vibrant civil society, you can't hold the government accountable. If there isn't a cultural, moral base with values that are operating, it's not going to work at all. If there is not a vibrant economy that is with a lot of private enterprise that creates the jobs, you've got to figure out a way at the same time to unleash all of these forces. If you look at any of them as a silver bullet, you said there's no silver bullet. I think you're absolutely right. You're going to have an arsenal of bullets. You're going to have to figure out a way to help them all. You know, a few years ago, there was a guy by the name of Larry Harrison, who used to be a mission director for USAID. And when he retired, he wrote a book called Culture Matters. And what he speculated on was, looking back on his work in Latin America, is, you know, we didn't pay enough attention to how do you inculcate the values that will sustain democracy and economic solutions. And he said, we've got to think more about values and not just providing stuff. We have to think about that part of development.
So what do we know about what seems to work and what doesn't work?
Can I give you one concrete, and this is kind of in the form of a confession.
Okay.
I think, you know, I used to work for USAID. I was in charge of global health, and I was in charge of aid to the former Soviet Union in Eastern Europe. And I started with the premise that if you could just change the election laws or open up sort of a free market economy, or then things are going to necessarily get better. And I realized later that was naive. You have to figure out what's going to allow this to really take off. At World Vision, I've noticed this. I thought the people who did your kind of work, Greg, the advocacy work, they're nice if you can afford to do it, but does talking about problems and justice make a difference? Here's what we discovered. In Uganda, when we unleashed what we call Citizens' Voice in Action program, which helped young people in groups and communities to simply politely talk with their government officials about, now, what does the law say about what we are to have, and how many teachers are we to have, and they just started a kind of a process of transparency. Even in situations where the government was not ideal, we were shocked to discover that after even a few months of Citizens' Voice in Action unleashing its effort on society, the indicators affecting the poor and society were all going up. And there was a direct connection between empowering people to just talk politely, not have a revolution, talk politely with officials, and even bad governments can be pushed in a better direction by doing that.
Let me just take a little break and tell the folks at home that we've gathered together folks from World Vision, Brookings Institution, the African Growth Initiative over there, Oxfam, and the ambassador from Niger to talk about global poverty. And I'm getting an education, as you are, as we go along. So sit tight. We'll pick up the conversation on the other side. This is America and the World. This is America and the World is brought to you by the National Education Association, the U.S.-China Education Trust and F.Y. Chang Foundation, guided by Ambassador Julia Chang Block, President. The League of Arab States, representing 350 million people in 22 member countries. Japan, history, hospitality, and advanced technology, sharing tomorrow. Tourism Malaysia. The Petrolin Group, expertise with integrity in the fields of oil and gas, exploration and production, energy, and infrastructure. The Panama Tourism Authority. The Rotondaro Family Trust. The Embassies Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings. And Ventana Productions, television facilities, editing, and distribution services. So, Amadou, you jumped on me a little bit for the direction I was heading in, but that's okay. That's okay. I contend, because of the conversation we had in Panama, that I'm not making, and I like the idea that you want to discuss opportunities, because I see Africa, Latin America, Baltimore, West Virginia, Mississippi, all struggling. And one question I'm going to ask is poverty different in the United States? Is poverty different in other countries in the world?
That's a difficult question. Well, you could distinguish urban setting and a rural setting, but I would think when it comes to poverty, on the one hand, they share, again, like this lack of opportunity, but on the other hand, I think it's Amartya Sen that did some work comparing some poor, quote-unquote, neighborhoods in India versus some in the rest of the world, and saying that it's all relative. But so I would say it's being poor in a village where you have, a big family and a social support. It might be different from being poor when you're single, alone, and unemployed in Baltimore.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. When you want to talk about opportunities, what in your experience and from your work, what seems to work, what doesn't work?
So first of all, I would say poverty is a multifaceted concept. And I think, as you said, there's no silver bullet. And right now, actually, in the development community, you hear this word blending, which means blending the money from the government, from the aid community, and so on. But it seems, if you look at the literature, what seems to be working? So there's this trend which says growth, economic growth helps. The problem is, how do you get fast, sustained economic growth? And there's no silver bullet either. Asia has developed differently from Africa. We have a much larger services sector, a smaller manufacturing sector. More importantly, we haven't fixed the productivity in our agriculture. And I think that like the Green Revolution that happened in Asia, that needs to happen in Africa. Most of the poor people are in the rural areas. We need to really have a more productive agriculture. That's one. And climate change is also a problem that we're facing. Rainfall is a significant variable to predict our GDPs in many of our countries. And number two is so it's the sectors, right? Agriculture seems to be having a bigger impact when it comes to reducing poverty, when you increase productivity in agriculture. Another one is the channels, right? Is it through labor productivity, labor income, or non-labor income? Non-labor income would be your subsidies, your transfers from the government, and remittances, right? So apparently, labor productivity is very important, being able basically to produce more in the same number of hours, let's say. But if you're really, really poor, then for extreme poverty, then remittances and subsidies and all those issues come. And then you have other policies on how do you escape poverty, infrastructure. I like infrastructure a lot because there's a focus right now in Africa that's very important. But with infrastructure, right now, in the rural area, 40%, half of the production is lost just getting it to market, because you don't have refrigerated trucks, you don't have railways, you don't have good roads, you don't have good trucks, and so on. So that helps. People in the hospitals are not being treated because there are power outages. At schools, sometimes at night, you cannot do your homework. So just infrastructure can help. You can also think in terms of constraints. So one constraint is capital. If poor people have a constraint in terms of capital, then you help them by giving them capital, like assets, money, and so on. Or if they don't have the knowledge, you help them by training and so on. Or let's say if they have other constraints that are bigger, like institutional capacity in the country, governance, and so on, you try to beef up those. So these are the different strands of the literature. There's no silver bullet, but yeah.
I think what's important in what Dr. C is saying is that, again, even though some of the symptoms of poverty are similar in a lot of different places, the solutions are really context specific. And so we really need to rely on communities and countries through their national development plans to be able to define which solutions are going to work for their context. Most importantly, we need to be able to have the patience to let countries figure this stuff out for themselves. I think we always have trouble in the development sector when we try to substitute our own judgment for the judgment of people living in partner countries. Now, I think that there's a lot that science can contribute to helping find solutions to particular development challenges. But too often we're providing solutions that aren't fit for the local context, and then we're surprised when they fail because we didn't bother to take the time to listen to what communities said they actually wanted.
So what you're saying is that the whole poverty thing is not giving it its just due, but it's the poverty issue is not only economic, but it's also political and social as well.
I would go so far to say
moral?
it is primarily a political challenge.
Let's go backwards. Political challenge. Help me there.
There's something.
Because something has been in my mind since my little exchange earlier. So there's about 50 African countries. 54. That's good. Of the 54 countries, how many of those 54 countries do you feel are effectively dealing with poverty, knowing that 3 billion people, that's pretty much half of the world, is living on this figure of $2.50 a day? How many countries in Africa do you feel are effectively dealing with poverty on all levels?
I think that's a loaded question because,
of
in fact, I
course
could
it
argue,
is.
but I could argue that the United States isn't effectively dealing with poverty.
I haven't even come to the United States yet.
It's honestly, it's a matter of degrees, and I think some
No.
governments.
Tell me. Is it 10? Is it 15? Is it half of them? Is it 5?
I don't think you can actually make that sort of judgment. I think there are some governments that have identified and are trying to implement policy solutions that show some promise. And I think we need to encourage that. We need to reward it and support it. But if we're constantly second-guessing what their approach is and
I agree.
and undermining those efforts, those experiments to try to crack this problem, I think that's where we get ourselves.
Well, the United States is not like when we come into a country and tell them what to do. I mean, that goes against it.
Let me
Please,
just jump
Ambassador.
and say, with regard
You're
to
getting very experienced at jumping in. I like that. Jumping in. I like that.
Let me jump and say, when you look at, for example, the development, today Africa is always compared to Asia. But for a number of years, when we talk about Asia in terms of development, there are situations which are similar to Africa, but nevertheless, Asia was viewed as a destination to invest, to have heavy investment, financing. But when we talk about Africa, we look at it differently.
Why?
For example, when you look at the development of Singapore, you look at South Korea, for me, I think the fact that heavy investments in education, heavy investment in infrastructure has helped these countries transform the type of economy, because there is investment in human capital that has transformed their economy. The same, we didn't have similar type of package for Africa. It's only now when you look at, for example, the Africa 2063, it clearly give us some indication that African government, they want investment, heavy investment in the agriculture sector to transform, modernization, investing in technology and innovation to modernize the agriculture sector. Today, African countries recognize that if you go country by one country, sometimes you are a small-scale economy. Therefore, you cannot mobilize enough capital to transform. So they're going through their economic community, regional economic communities, so that the countries bring what they have, which is complementary in terms of economic transformation. I think when you look at, for example, the construction of the road, it's not only Niger, it is Benin, it is Burkina Faso, all the way to Cote d'Ivoire, because they know that country by country, they cannot make those transformations. But if they have a more regional approach to infrastructure buildings, to energy, therefore, you are going to have more people across borders working with each other and to transform their own reality.
Why do you, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you know, I heard somebody say recently, if you took all the sort of the development experts or economists and you laid them in across Virginia, they still wouldn't reach a conclusion. And, you know, on this question, are things getting better or worse? The information is astoundingly clear. Charles Kinney wrote a book called Getting Better. And if you read also the recent report on the 14th year, the 15th year of the Millennium Development Goals, the gains have been staggering. FAO, within the last few weeks, gave information that suggested that whereas in the past, 10 years ago, 1 out of 5 people in the world were very seriously hungry, it's 1 in 9 now. Or take the Millennium Development Goal, which said that under 5 mortality, we want to reduce it by 2/3. Well, they haven't made the goal. So some say, oh, they failed. What did they reach? They reached half. Half as many children are dying every day. 17,000 children a day, under 5, are living today that would have died. Now, does that mean there's not a lot of poverty left? Of course not. But we're not, a lot of times people want to get money for their programs. And they do it by being very negative about how bad things are. That's not only not good politics, it's just not true. So we've had successes, but we have big problems left.
And how do you account for those successes?
I think the concerted efforts of lots of people all around the world, and including host countries, that have made a difference. The population is bigger, and yet these problems have in fact scaled back. So it's been a collective effort.
Yes,
It's been a collective effort.
I think it's really important to acknowledge this progress. And just, you know, kind of for me, the headline is, over the last 15 years, 1 billion people have managed to escape poverty. That's a tremendous accomplishment. Kent listed a number of other accomplishments. And I think what's important to note is that people are doing this on their own. It wasn't aid that caused this to happen. I think there's a lot of places where aid made a contribution. But it's important to note that people in developing countries are actually doing this on their own, whether they're people living in poverty themselves, community leaders, civil society leaders, even leaders in government and the private sector are causing these huge increases in wealth, these incredible growth rates that we see in Africa. The real question is, now that that wealth is being created, and for me as an American, there's 2 questions. The first question is, what is the American contribution going to be? As people themselves in developing countries go on this journey, are they going to look back 20, 30 years from now and say that America was a partner, that America did all it could do to actually help them? And the second question, I think, is what can our contribution really be? How do we make sure that the wealth that is out there is actually shared in a way where it actually responds to what people themselves are contributing, and making sure that it's not actually empowering a few people at the top, whether by circumstance or the political influence that they have, are able to actually rig the rules to their benefit.
Something the ambassador said, and now something that you've just put on the table, you look at the investment of China in Africa, which is a heck of a lot more than the United States is investing. Why is that so?
Why is that so? I think the Chinese see an opportunity, and they're willing
Back to opportunity.
Yeah, they see an opportunity that I think American investors are still a little shy about pursuing. But it's, you know, the Chinese investment, I think, is, well, I wouldn't say it's a blessing or a curse. I would say any sort of investment is neutral. The question is then how it actually gets invested, and what sort of accountability there is on how the results for that investment get shared. And that's not something really that is, ultimately I think that's the responsibility of the governments where the investment itself is occurring. Do those governments have rules in place that actually are transparent, well understood, and allow citizens to influence how their governments actually engage with those sorts of investments, whether it's investment from China or whether it's investment from Europe or the United States.
That's why we want really AGOA. Today, the House passed the AGOA bill.
What is that?
African Growth Opportunity Act, which was enacted in 2000, and now 15 years later, it is in the House. It just passed the House for reauthorization, and the Senate will deal with it. So we are very hopeful that AGOA will pass, and that's for us in terms of partnership within the private sector, the government. AGOA will provide a platform whereby U.S. will encourage investment between American companies and African companies. This is the type of engagement that we want today America to see. We want America to see Africa, all African countries, as a destination where the private sector can invest and make a profit, and also the African can invest in the United States and make profit. It's a win-win situation. So in addition to the traditional aid, we really want the private sector to see Africa, for example, Power Africa. It's a big opportunity.
Why have we been short on that so far?
I think this one has to also link it to history.
I believe you exactly
To history.
Right. Exactly right.
Before, when you look at African countries, they have been divided into countries belonging to the French colony, former colony, countries belonging to the former British colony or former Portuguese colony. And in terms of how the partnership has been evolving, you see more commercial partnership, for example, between Francophone countries and France, between Great Britain and Anglophone African countries. I think today we are in a globalization where all countries can trade with each other in spite of history, or maybe because of history. And so I think growth and opportunities, we should see it beyond this historical dispensation and see how can we empower ourselves, all countries, in spite of this historical background.
We just have less than a minute left, but let me just toss this out on the table. Can we have a world without poverty, or can we keep moving forward? Amadou?
Well, it depends on what do you define as poverty, but I think the type of extreme poverty that we're having right now, it's up to us to do it for the future generations and just eliminate it.
Greg, quick comment?
There is, we absolutely can have a world without poverty. There's enough wealth today to lift everyone out of poverty. The question is, how is it shared, and does everyone actually have equal opportunity to share in that?
Ken?
We can significantly reduce it. So long as these kind of things depend on values and culture, it's going to depend on our moral state. And if our moral state does not significantly improve, there's likely to continue to be poverty. But we can make tremendous inroads.
You get the last word, but one word.
I am
Yes?
very hopeful.
You are very helpful. Thank you very much. Thank you for everyone at the table for a great conversation. Thank you. Very hopeful. I like that. For information about This Is America and the World and to watch all of our programs, visit our website, thisisamerica.net, and look for us on Facebook and Twitter. This is America and the World is brought to you by the National Education Association, the U.S.-China Education Trust, and F.Y. Chang Foundation, guided by Ambassador Julia Chang Block, President. The League of Arab States, representing 350 million people in 22 member countries. Japan, history, hospitality, and advanced technology. Sharing tomorrow. Tourism Malaysia. The Petroleum Group, expertise with integrity in the fields of oil and gas, exploration and production, energy and infrastructure. The Panama Tourism Authority. The Rotondaro Family Trust. The Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings. And Ventana Productions, television facilities, editing, and distribution services.